The factory was in chaos, alarms buzzing and workers running from one end to the other. The main production machine, worth millions, had suddenly stopped working right in the middle of an investor inspection. The company, one of the biggest in the city, was owned by Alina Graves, a powerful young CEO known for her confidence and perfection. She stood there with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes watching the engineers panic as they failed again and again to restart the system. Alina had built her reputation on strength and success, so failure in front of her investors was not an option. Her voice echoed through the factory floor, calm yet full of pressure. "Fix it now," she ordered. The chief engineer, sweating under his helmet, stammered, "Ma'am, we've tried everything. The control unit is fried, the machine won't start." Investors whispered among themselves, disappointment spreading like smoke. Just then a voice came from the side gate. "Maybe I can take a look." Everyone turned, surprised. A man stood there, wearing old overalls covered in grease. His name was Ethan Cole, a small-time street mechanic who worked nearby. He had been walking past when he noticed the noise and confusion. His tools hung loosely from his belt and his hands looked rough from years of labor. Alina frowned, confused and slightly annoyed. "Who let him in?" she snapped. The guard explained he was just passing by. Ethan stepped closer, calm but determined. "I've repaired machines like this before," he said softly. "Maybe I can help." The workers exchanged doubtful looks, some laughed under their breath. "You? This is a high-end automated system," one said mockingly. Alina smirked, her pride rising. "You think you can fix what my best engineers couldn't?" Ethan didn't respond. His calm eyes met hers, and that quiet confidence unsettled her for a moment. Then she chuckled sarcastically. "Fine, if you fix this machine, I'll marry you," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter broke out across the floor. Even the engineers smiled nervously. Ethan didn't laugh. He simply nodded. "Deal," he said. The laughter stopped. His serious tone created an odd silence. Alina raised her eyebrows, unsure whether to feel insulted or amused. "Go ahead then," she said with a wave of her hand. "Show me what you can do." Ethan approached the massive machine slowly, studying it carefully. The control board flickered weakly. Smoke stains around the circuits. He knelt down, removed a few panels, and touched the inner wires like a doctor checking a heartbeat. The chief engineer stood beside Alina, whispering, "Ma'am, he'll only waste time." But Alina didn't reply. She watched silently as Ethan worked with focus. His fingers moved with precision. He used nothing but his simple tools, a wrench, a screwdriver, and an old voltmeter. Within minutes, he had located a melted fuse and a loose grounding wire that none of the team noticed. He replaced the fuse with a spare part he carried in his pocket, adjusted the power relay, and reset the main line. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but he didn't stop. The crowd stood in silence, watching every move. Finally, he pulled the lever down. The machine shuddered, coughed once, and then, like magic, it roared back to life. The loud hum filled the room. Bright lights flashed on the control panel. The belt started moving and the entire system came alive again. The investors gasped, then started clapping. The workers looked at each other in disbelief. The same engineers who failed for hours stood speechless. Alina took a small step forward, staring at the running machine. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The man she had mocked minutes ago had done what her whole technical team couldn't. Ethan turned toward her, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Told you it could be fixed," he said simply. For a few seconds, Alina said nothing. Her pride didn't know how to react: anger, respect, or shock. She forced a faint smile and said coldly, "Impressive," trying to sound casual, though her voice trembled slightly. The investors rushed to her, congratulating her company for incredible recovery, while reporters snapped photos. But all she could think about was that one line she said, "If you fix this machine, I'll marry you." And the fact that he actually did it, Ethan didn't ask for praise or reward. He packed his tools quietly as people continued clapping. Before leaving, he looked back once and said softly, "Machines only break when people stop listening to them." Then he walked out of the factory gates. Disappearing into the noise of the city, Alina stood frozen for a long time, still hearing his calm words for the first time in years. She felt something unfamiliar. Not power, not pride, but humility. The same crowd that once laughed at the mechanic now whispered about his genius. And deep down, Alina knew this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. She just didn't realize yet how much that small joke would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the sun rose over the city's skyline, golden light reflecting off the glass towers of Graves Industries. Inside the massive factory, everyone was still talking about what happened yesterday. The mysterious mechanic who came out of nowhere, fixed the dead machine, and walked away like it was nothing. Some said it was luck. Others whispered that he was a genius. But for Alina Graves, the proud CEO, it was something more, a bruise to her pride that she couldn't stop thinking about. She sat in her glass office, looking down at the factory floor where the machine now worked perfectly. Her engineers were running diagnostics, but she barely heard them. Her mind kept replaying that moment, the hum of the machine coming to life, the silence that followed, and Ethan's calm words, "Machines only break when people stop listening to them." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like he understood things that her expensive degree never taught her. Alina called her assistant. "Find out who that man was," she ordered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a strange restlessness. Within hours, they learned his name, Ethan Cole, a small-town mechanic, 32 years old, worked alone in an old garage by the river. He had no fancy degree, no certifications, nothing that explained how he could fix a system worth millions. That made Alina even more curious. Later that evening, Alina left the office early, something she never did. She drove herself through the older part of town. Away from skyscrapers and luxury cafes, the streets grew narrower, and the air smelled like oil and smoke. Finally, she found a small garage with a faded sign, Cole Auto Repairs. The place looked humble but neat. Ethan was inside, repairing an old pickup truck. He looked up as her car stopped outside but didn't seem surprised. "You came," he said calmly, wiping his hands. Alina hesitated before stepping out. The air felt heavy. She didn't know why she was there, curiosity, gratitude, or guilt, maybe all three. "You fixed a machine my best engineers couldn't," she began, trying to sound professional. "How did you do it?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I listened to it," he said simply. "Every machine has a rhythm if you listen carefully. It tells you what's wrong." Alina crossed her arms, pretending to stay in control. "You make it sound like the machine has feelings," she said with a small laugh. "Maybe not feelings," he replied, "but they respond to care, like people." For a moment, silence hung between them, only broken by the soft buzz of an electric fan. Alina felt something strange in his calmness. He didn't try to impress her, didn't act nervous, he was just steady. She looked around the garage, old tools, dusty shelves, a cracked radio playing soft music. Nothing expensive, yet everything seemed full of purpose. It was a world far from her glittering office. "But oddly peaceful, you know," she said softly. "You embarrassed a lot of my people yesterday." Ethan shrugged. "Didn't mean to, ma'am. I just fixed what was broken." His tone was respectful but firm. He didn't flatter her, and that made her feel oddly small before leaving. Alina paused by the doorway. "You know, I wasn't serious about what I said yesterday," she murmured, referring to the marriage joke. Ethan looked at her quietly. "I know," he said, "but sometimes words have a funny way of coming back." She didn't understand what he meant, but the calm way he said it sent a strange chill down her spine. The next day, the story had already gone viral online. Someone from the factory had filmed the entire scene. The clip of the CEO mocking the mechanic, and the mechanic fixing the impossible machine spread everywhere. Comments flooded social media. "The real genius isn't always in a suit. She should keep her promise." Alina's PR team panicked, investors were amused, and news channels were calling it the mechanic's miracle. Alina tried to laugh it off in meetings, but deep down she was restless. Every mention of Ethan's name made her heart twist slightly. She didn't like losing control of any situation, and right now, this simple man from a dusty garage had shaken her perfect world. Meanwhile, Ethan went back to his quiet life. He didn't care about fame. He didn't even have a social media account. He fixed engines, helped locals, and sometimes stared at the stars after closing his shop. Yet deep down, he remembered the woman who mocked him and then looked at him with eyes full of confusion and pride. He didn't hate her. In fact, he respected her drive, her courage to lead, and her hidden loneliness that he saw beneath all that steel confidence. That night, as rain began to fall over the city, Alina stood near her apartment window, looking at the storm. The lightning flickered across the skyline, and she whispered to herself, "Why can't I stop thinking about him?" For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a CEO. She felt human, curious, and vulnerable. What neither of them knew was that fate wasn't done with them yet. The next twist was already on its way. A test that would not only challenge their pride but also their hearts. And soon, the promise she once made in jest would start to feel like something real, something she might not be able to take back. Days passed since that strange visit to Ethan's small garage, but Alina couldn't focus on her work. Every time she looked at the machine he repaired, it reminded her of him. The way he stood so calm while everyone laughed. The way his hands moved like he could hear the heartbeat of the machine. She hated that she couldn't get him out of her head. The proud CEO who once thought she was untouchable was now distracted by a man who lived in a place smaller than her bathroom. Her assistant, Clara, noticed the change. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked one morning. Alina blinked. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, pretending to be busy on her screen, but her mind wasn't in the reports. It was with the man who refused her money and said he just did what he knew best. Those words, simple yet powerful, played in her mind over and over again. Meanwhile, Ethan's life hadn't changed much. The video of him fixing the machine had gone viral online. But he didn't care. He didn't even own a smartphone. The people in his neighborhood, however, treated him differently now. Some called him the machine whisperer. Others joked that he might marry a CEO soon. Ethan only smiled quietly and continued his work. He was not interested in fame. He was a man of peace and purpose. One afternoon, a black car stopped outside his garage again. He didn't need to look twice to know who it was. Alina stepped out wearing casual clothes this time, not her usual business armor. "You really should stop finding me," he said playfully, wiping his hands. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just checking if your machines are still working." Ethan tilted his head. "Machines never stop working if you care for them," he said. "It's people who forget to listen." They talked longer that day, longer than either expected for the first time. Alina didn't feel like a boss talking to a worker. She felt like a woman talking to someone who actually understood her silence. Ethan told her how he learned mechanics by fixing farm engines as a child. He never went to college, but he had something books couldn't teach. Patience and observation. Alina found herself listening, truly listening to someone she once dismissed. When she returned to her office later, her secretary informed her that the investors had requested an award ceremony to celebrate the factory's miracle fix. They wanted Ethan there to recognize his effort publicly. Alina agreed, though she didn't know why her heart raced at the thought. On the day of the ceremony, the factory was filled with cameras, reporters, and applause. Ethan walked in wearing a simple, clean shirt. Standing out among the sea of suits, Alina stood on the stage, her usual confidence slightly shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "sometimes the most brilliant minds don't come from high offices, but from humble places." Her eyes found Ethan in the crowd. This man reminded us that passion and honesty are worth more than any title. When she handed him the award, their hands brushed lightly, a simple touch that somehow sent a quiet spark through both. The crowd clapped, cameras flashed, but in that moment, it felt like time slowed down. Ethan smiled modestly and whispered, "I told you it could be fixed." Alina laughed softly, this time not in pride or disbelief, but in admiration. After the event, Alina's board members warned her to be careful. "You're the face of a billion-dollar company," one said. "Don't let some garage mechanic become your distraction." She didn't respond. But inside, something changed for the first time. She questioned everything she once believed about class, power, and success. That evening, Alina stood alone in the now silent factory, the same place where she once mocked him. The hum of the machine filled the air, steady and alive. She touched its metal surface and whispered, "You really listened to him, didn't you?" As if the machine itself had heard Ethan's hands. Outside, Ethan passed by on his bike, slowing for a moment as he saw her standing there behind the glass wall. Their eyes met for a few seconds, no words. Just a quiet understanding. She was still the CEO, and he was still the mechanic, but something unspoken had connected them. In the following days, rumors began to swirl. Employees whispered that the boss seemed different, softer, kinder, more thoughtful. They noticed she spent more time on the factory floor, learning how things worked, even speaking kindly to workers she once ignored. She didn't admit it to anyone, but she had learned that respect wasn't demanded. It was earned. And the man who taught her that didn't wear a suit. Ethan, on the other hand, began feeling a strange restlessness too. He tried to focus on his work, but every sound of a machine reminded him of her voice, her sharp eyes, and the unexpected warmth beneath them. He told himself it was nothing, just gratitude or curiosity, but deep down, he knew it was something else, a pull he couldn't explain. Late one night, as rain fell again and thunder rolled in the distance, Alina sat by her window holding the small award plaque that bore Ethan's name. Her reflection in the glass looked tired yet peaceful. Maybe some promises, she whispered softly, aren't just jokes after all. And far away, under a flickering streetlight, Ethan looked up at the same stormy sky, feeling like somewhere out there, someone was thinking of him too. For the first time in years, Alina Graves couldn't sleep. The city lights outside her tall apartment windows flickered like restless stars, but her mind was somewhere else every time she closed her eyes. She saw his face, the mechanic who didn't bow, didn't beg, and didn't care about money, Ethan Cole. The man she had mocked in front of everyone and who still looked at her with quiet dignity instead of hate. She sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her success, her company, her luxury. None of it felt enough anymore. Something was missing. Something that even her billions couldn't buy. She realized she hadn't respected people for a long time. She only respected results. And Ethan had given her the greatest result of all. Proof that pride means nothing when faced with pure skill and heart. The next morning, she arrived at the office before sunrise. Her employees watched her in surprise as she walked past them silently. She entered the production floor alone and stood in front of the giant machine Ethan had fixed. The sound of its steady rhythm filled the air. She placed her hand on the cold metal, her reflection visible in its polished surface. "You're still alive because of him," she whispered. Feeling a lump in her throat, her assistant, Clara, joined her quietly. "Ma'am, you look tired," she said softly. Alina nodded slowly. "Clara, do you think I was wrong?" Clara hesitated. "About what?" "About judging people," Alina said. "About thinking success makes me better than others." Clara smiled gently. "You're human, ma'am. We all forget where we came from sometimes." That day, Alina canceled meetings, postponed calls, and locked herself in her office. She went through the report from the day of the breakdown, reading every detail. Each line reminded her of how close she came to losing everything, and how one ordinary man saved her company without asking for anything. She thought about his words again. Machines only break when people stop listening. By evening, she made up her mind. She called Clara and said, "Find him," Clara blinked. "The mechanic?" Alina nodded. "Yes, I owe him something." The assistant smiled knowingly. "I'll try." But when Clara returned hours later, her face looked uncertain. "I found his shop, but it's closed," she said. "Neighbors say he left town 2 days ago. Maybe visiting his mother in the countryside." Alina's heart sank. She didn't know why, but the thought of him being far away made her feel a strange emptiness. Days passed, but the feeling didn't fade. Alina found herself checking the garage every evening on her way home, hoping the lights would be on. Hoping to see him again, she even left a note once. Written in her elegant handwriting, "Thank you for reminding me what true strength looks like. AG." But no reply ever came. Meanwhile, Ethan was miles away, in his small hometown by the river, fixing old boats for fishermen. He had seen the chaos his viral video created, people offering him jobs, interviews, even TV appearances, but he declined them all. He wasn't looking for fame, he just wanted peace, yet deep inside, he couldn't forget the woman with the steel eyes who had softened at the end. The woman who learned humility from him. One night as he sat on the dock watching the stars, he pulled out the folded note she had left at his garage. He smiled quietly. "You're welcome," he whispered to no one back in the city. Alina faced growing tension from her board members. Some wanted to distance the company from the viral mechanic story, calling it a distraction. "People think you're emotionally attached," one of them said sharply during a meeting. Alina looked at him coldly. "Maybe I am," she said. "Maybe I finally care about something real." The boardroom fell silent. No one dared to argue. They all saw something in her eyes, something different, something human. After the meeting, she walked outside into the rain, her heels splashing through puddles. She didn't use her umbrella. The water washed over her face, and she didn't care. "He changed me," she murmured to herself. "And I laughed at him." She closed her eyes and whispered into the storm. "I was wrong, Ethan." I was so wrong. The next morning, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She announced a new company program to fund small-town inventors and local mechanics who had no formal education. She named it the Coal Initiative, saying it was inspired by an unnamed genius who reminded me that greatness doesn't always wear a suit. Reporters asked her who the man was, but she only smiled and said, "He knows." As the months went on, the program became a success and her company's reputation rose even higher. But Alina still felt something missing. Every achievement reminded her of him. Every new invention reminded her of his quiet hands fixing that broken engine. Sometimes, late at night, she would drive past his old garage and sit in her car for a few minutes. The lights were still off, dust gathering at the doors, but in her heart she believed that someday, somehow he would return. And if that day ever came, she promised herself she would say the words she should have said long ago. Not as a CEO, not as a boss, but as a woman who finally understood the meaning of respect. Until then, she carried that silence inside her. A silent regret that burned softly like a secret flame. A reminder that not all promises are jokes, and not all love stories begin with a smile. Some begin with a challenge and end with a realization that pride can never fix what the heart has already broken. The wind was cold that morning, sweeping through the empty streets as Alina's car rolled past the edge of the city. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, not even Clara. Her board thought she was attending a business meeting in another district. But the truth was different. She was going to find him, Ethan Cole, the man she mocked, and the man who changed her life without even trying. For weeks she had searched through records, old workshop lists, and even charity registers. But every trail ended the same. He left town. The more she searched, the more restless she became. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was something deeper, an ache she didn't know how to name. Her sleek car finally stopped in a small riverside town hours away from the city. The air smelled of salt and oil, and the roads were rough with dust. She stepped out, dressed simply in jeans and a jacket, trying not to stand out among the fishermen and workers. Her heels crunched softly on gravel as she asked a shopkeeper, "Do you know a man named Ethan Cole?" The old man smiled faintly. "Ah, the mechanic who fixes boats now," he said, pointing toward the docks. "Down there by the old pier." Alina's heart began to pound. She walked toward the water, the sound of seagulls echoing around her. Ethan was there, crouched beside a small fishing boat, tightening a rusty bolt. His hair was messy, his sleeves rolled up, and his hands were still as steady as ever. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, their eyes met. The world seemed to pause. "You found me," he said softly. Wiping his hands on a rag, Alina smiled awkwardly. "You disappeared," she replied, trying to sound casual but failing. "I needed some peace," he said, standing. "City noise isn't my kind of music." They stood silently for a few seconds, the wind rustling between them. Finally, Alina spoke, her voice quieter. "I wanted to say thank you properly this time." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You already did. You named a program after me," he said, a small smile forming. "The Coal Initiative." "Pretty generous," Alina laughed softly. "You knew?" He nodded. "People talk. Even here." She looked down, embarrassed. "It wasn't charity," she said. "It was respect. You changed how I see everything." Ethan's expression softened, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at her like he could see straight through the mask she wore every day. They walked along the dock together, the sunset painting the water in gold. Alina told him how the company changed, how she changed after that day. She admitted her mistakes, her pride, her loneliness. "You made me realize something," she said quietly. "I spent years building machines but forgot to build myself." Ethan looked at the horizon and murmured, "Sometimes the hardest engine to fix is the one inside." They stopped near the end of the pier, where the water shimmered like molten glass. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them carried a mix of regret and hope. Finally, Alina said with a faint smile, "You know, I still owe you something." Ethan looked puzzled. "What's that?" She hesitated, then whispered, "A promise I made. One I didn't mean at the time." He blinked, realizing what she was talking about. "The marriage thing?" he said with a small laugh. She nodded. "Yes, that," she said, smiling shyly. "It was supposed to be a joke, but it changed my life." Ethan chuckled softly. "And what if I told you I fixed it because I believed in that promise?" Her breath caught for a moment, not knowing whether he was joking or serious. His tone was light, but his eyes were deep, too deep. They stood there in silence, just looking at each other. the sound of the waves filling the air like music. When it was time for her to leave, Alina turned back one last time. "Will you ever come back to the city?" she asked. Ethan shook his head slightly. "Maybe someday when machines there start listening again." She smiled sadly. "Then I'll wait," she said softly as her car drove away. Ethan stood watching until it disappeared. He felt something stir inside, a feeling he hadn't let himself admit before. She wasn't just another rich woman. She was someone who had found her way through arrogance and learned humility. And maybe, just maybe, she was worth waiting for back in the city. Alina sat quietly in her car. Replaying every word he said, she didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. For the first time, she didn't feel like a CEO or a leader. She felt like a woman who had finally found someone who understood her without words. That night she wrote in her journal for the first time in years. "I found him. The man who reminded me that pride can build walls but humility opens doors. I hope one day he walks through mine again." She closed the book, placed it beside her bed, and turned off the lights outside. The city buzzed like a machine that would never rest. But somewhere by the quiet river, a man looked at the stars and whispered her name into the wind, a promise not forgotten. A month passed since that quiet meeting by the riverside. Yet Alina couldn't forget it. She returned to her city life, her company, her meetings, but everything felt different now. The skyscrapers that once made her proud now felt like empty shells. She missed the sound of the waves, the smell of oil and salt, and the calm eyes of Ethan Cole, the man who didn't chase wealth but somehow owned peace. Every night she would stand on her balcony and look at the stars, wondering if he was looking at them too sometimes. She caught herself smiling at the memory of his voice, the way he said things with such simple truth. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not afraid, not impressed, just honest. It made her heart restless. One evening, while reviewing designs for a new machine prototype, Alina noticed something strange. The engineers had made the same mistake that caused the first machine to fail months ago. She frowned and went down to the factory floor herself. The workers looked surprised to see the CEO in her heels and gloves fixing circuits. She rolled up her sleeves and guided them, repeating Ethan's words. "Listen to the rhythm before you touch the parts." The machine started running smoothly again, and the workers clapped, but she just smiled softly, whispering, "You'd be proud of me, Ethan." Days later, Clara entered her office holding a letter. "This came for you," she said. Alina opened it quickly. Her eyes widened. It was written on rough paper, the handwriting uneven but familiar. It was from Ethan. "Heard about the new program you built. You're changing lives, Alina. Thought you should know that machine down at the docks finally gave up, but it was a good fight. Guess everything breaks one day, even the strong ones. Take care of yourself. Ethan." She read it over and over, her chest tightening. He didn't write much, but every line felt heavy with meaning. She couldn't help but whisper his name. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the letter close to her heart. That night she made a decision. She canceled her meetings for the next day and drove back to the same riverside town. Her assistant tried to stop her, but Alina just smiled. "I owe someone a promise," she said quietly. The drive was long, but her heart felt lighter with every mile. When she arrived, the town looked the same. Quiet, simple, full of honest people. But when she reached the dock, Ethan wasn't there. She asked around, and a young boy told her he had gone into the forested hills to repair an old water pump for a farming village. Without hesitation, she followed. Her expensive shoes got muddy, her clothes got dusty, but she didn't care. Hours later, she found him at the edge of a stream, crouched beside a rusted pump. His sleeves were rolled up, and his hands were black with grease. He looked up surprised but not shocked, as if he already knew she would come. "You found me again," he said with a small smile. "You make that sound like a habit," she teased back. Breathless from the walk, he chuckled. "Maybe it's just fate." They stood under the golden light of sunset, the forest quiet except for the gentle sound of water. Alina stepped closer, holding out the letter he had written. "You forgot to mention something," she said softly. Ethan looked puzzled. "What's that?" She took a deep breath and whispered, "Your promise." "The one I laughed about." He froze, watching her eyes glisten with sincerity. "I came to make it real," she said, voice trembling, "not because I have to, but because I want to." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of the river, Ethan's heart pounded quietly as he looked at her. The same woman who once mocked him now standing before him like someone reborn. "You sure about this?" he asked gently. "This isn't the kind of thing to joke about again." She nodded. "I'm done joking about real things," he smiled. That same soft, steady smile she'd never forgotten. "You're still wearing those fancy shoes," he said quietly. She looked down and laughed through her tears. "Then maybe you should teach me how to walk barefoot." They stood there for a long time, neither saying much, just listening to the stream, the wind, and the quiet beating of their hearts. Ethan reached out slowly, his calloused hand brushing hers, and for the first time she didn't pull away later. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, she whispered, "You once said machines only break when people stop listening." Ethan looked at her. "Yes?" She smiled softly. "Then I'll listen this time. Not to the machines, but to you." He didn't reply, but the way he looked at her said everything words couldn't. And when she finally rested her head on his shoulder, the world around them felt whole again. Not because a machine was fixed, but because two broken hearts had finally started working in the same rhythm. The morning sun glowed soft and golden over the city skyline. Its light filtered through the windows of Graves Industries, the same company where everything had begun months ago. But this time the atmosphere was different. The workers smiled more, the air felt lighter, and even the machines seemed to hum in rhythm with joy. Rumor had spread that the CEO was hosting a special event that day, something no one could quite explain. Inside the grand hall, banners hung with the company's emblem. The same machine that Ethan had fixed months ago stood gleaming under bright lights, perfectly polished not just as a piece of metal but as a symbol of change. On its side was engraved a small plate that read, "To those who fix what others give up on." Ethan Cole stood near the stage, wearing a crisp shirt and jacket, looking uncomfortable under the attention. His hands still bore faint traces of oil, but his calm smile made him look more confident than ever. Around him, employees whispered with excitement. "That's him. The mechanic who saved the company," they said. Then the doors opened and Alina Graves entered, dressed not in her usual sharp suit, but in a simple white dress that flowed like morning light. The crowd fell silent. Some knew her as the fearless CEO, but today she looked human, softer. The same woman who once mocked a mechanic now walked toward him with a smile that held both humility and love. When she reached the stage, she took the microphone. Her voice trembled slightly at first. "A few months ago, I said something foolish," she began. "I laughed at a man who offered help when I thought I knew everything." Her eyes found Ethan's, steady and warm. "He taught me that true strength isn't in titles or money. It's in hands that build, in hearts that don't give up, and in people who stay humble even when the world mocks them." The audience listened quietly, a few wiping tears from their eyes. "That day, I made a promise I didn't mean," she continued. "But life has a strange way of turning jokes into destiny." She turned to Ethan and smiled. "So, Mr. Cole, if the offer still stands—" "I'm ready to keep my word," the crowd gasped. Then erupted into cheers. Ethan blinked, stunned for a moment. But then he laughed softly. Shaking his head in disbelief, he stepped closer to her, his voice low and full of warmth. "You always did keep people guessing, didn't you?" She grinned. "Only when it matters." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Say yes already," and laughter filled the hall. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "Then yes," he said. "Let's fix this life together." Applause thundered through the factory. Cameras flashed, workers clapped, and the same machine that started it all hummed louder, as if celebrating too. For a brief second, Alina looked at it and whispered, "You listened after all." The ceremony was simple but full of emotion. No luxury decorations, no royal setting. Just two people standing in front of the same machine that brought them together. Ethan's mother and a few townsfolk had been invited, along with Alina's closest employees. Clara stood at the back wiping away a tear, whispering to another assistant, "I told you she'd find him." When they exchanged rings, Alina's voice was soft but firm. "You fixed a broken machine, Ethan," she said. "But you also fixed me," he smiled, holding her hand tightly. "Machines are easy. People take time, but you were worth every second." The hall burst into applause again, but they barely heard it. Their world had narrowed to just each other. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, They stood together on the balcony overlooking the factory floor. The lights below glowed like stars, and the rhythmic hum of engines filled the air. "You remember the first time we met?" Alina asked, leaning against him. "How could I forget?" Ethan said with a chuckle. "You threatened me with marriage." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Guess the threat worked." They stood there quietly for a while, watching the workers below finishing their shifts. The people who once laughed at a poor mechanic now looked up to him. The woman who once lived behind walls of pride now found peace beside him. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal gear, the same one he had replaced on the day he fixed her machine. "Souvenir," he said, placing it in her palm. "This little thing changed everything." She looked at it, smiling. "No, you did." As night fell, the city outside shimmered with lights, but inside the factory, where a miracle once happened, something even greater had begun. A story not about machines or wealth, but about two souls who learned that sometimes love begins with a challenge and ends with a promise kept. From that day onward, the legend of the CEO and the mechanic spread far and wide, inspiring countless people. They said that whenever a machine broke down at Graves Industries, the sound of its hum carried a whisper, a reminder of the day a humble man taught an empire what true strength and love meant. And every morning before starting work, Ethan would smile at his wife and say, "Let's make sure the world keeps running." And Alina would reply, "As long as we keep listening." The machine turned on, the factory came alive, and their story, born from laughter and pride, became the heartbeat of hope for everyone who believed that even the most broken things can be fixed, if you care enough to try.